Well, welcome to Survivor Space and the Survivor Circle session on internal strengths, resourcing the survivor for the healing journey. I'm very happy to welcome my friend Rick Goodwin back to lead us through this discussion today. And Rick, I will turn it over to you.
Okay, well, thank you, Becky, and greetings to one and all for joining us, particularly for this session. This is a fun topic. This is a topic that um, my guess, my sense is that after we're all said and done working on internal strengths, you just might feel a little bit more resourced, um, a little bit more tools in your toolbox that aren't necessarily new, but maybe they've been there all along. So that's fine. That's the teaser. That's the promise of the work we can do today. Just to say that none of this would be possible. Survivor Space, certainly, if it wasn't for the good folks. Here we go. At the Office for Victims of Crime, who provided Zero Abuse with the necessary funding for us to deliver these services. So your tax dollar is at work. Glad to have their backing and glad to put out important stuff for all of us to be attending to, but particularly those of us who have lived experience of. Here, the focus may be on childhood trauma, certainly, but other forms of wounding could also apply. So it's not just around childhood abuse and childhood abuse recovery. So where do we start off this topic of internal strengths? Well, internal means inside us, obviously. So we're not talking about that therapist on the other side of town or a book collection of titles maybe at the library you could tap into, all good stuff. But we're talking about our strengths inside. Now, here's a few things we can say just to kind of get going. I think we all know, I mean, you wouldn't be maybe going out of your way to view this webinar uh, to know that trauma depletes the individual. That experience of childhood abuse, other forms of assault, other forms of wounding does not resource the individual, it depletes the individual. And this is what we need to attend to today. Now, we could also say that we all have, if this has been our lived experience, we all have implemented a variety of coping mechanisms from the get-go, all as a survival strategy. We could talk about the most immediate coping mechanism at the time of abuse, whether that's physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, and neglect. We can talk about the most primary coping mechanism is dissociation. Now, we've worked on dissociation in another webinar, but that's a kind of losing connection with ourselves, a splitting between possibly our mind and recall of the situation and the big emotions that were part of that abuse story. But there's a variety, could be potentially hundreds of individual unique coping mechanisms that have kept people going. Now, of course, many of those coping mechanisms may have worked back then, but they may not be working for you right as well right now. And so this is also part of a challenge area that, let's say that with your own experience of being harmed, you developed kind of a steady habit of drinking or drugging. And maybe that kept you going. Maybe that got you through each day. So we can't necessarily say, oh, that's wrong. But we know that only works for a while. And a lot of people start coming to terms with their past abuse after they've stopped relying on substance use. So here we've got then the notion of coping mechanisms that are, some of which are old, or some of them don't work as well anymore. Now, I'm going to pick on my friend Becky here, and if I said, if I knew, say, in this, using her as my as my kind of whatever my example, and let's say Becky was harmed as a child, and she relied upon things like drinking. Maybe she over utilizes her anger and rage. Maybe Becky gets on her cell phone and spends inordinate time on her cell phone and neglects other parts of her life. I could say to Becky, well, Becky, that's not going to be helpful in your recovery. So you really should stop that drinking and drugging, and you really should stop that overutilization of your cell phone or social media or any other compulsive behavior. And all that anger and rage stuff, Becky, you've got to kind of stop that to recover. Now, if I said that to her in this role that she was the survivor person, there would be a lot of resistance, even if in her mind she knows that these aren't helpful things to do anymore. Because no one wants to give up stuff. I don't think I've met a person who wants to consciously and deliberately give up things left and right because they've been told it is good for them. So here's what we need to consider. And we need to consider this for those of us in the therapy biz, but it's also true in friendships and our concern and support of our loved ones, is that instead of just asking to give up things, it's going to be, what works much better is to have an exchange. So I could say to Becky, I hear your anger and rage, but how about you try working at being assertive with yourself, and I can coach you on that, and see how that works for you in terms of getting your needs met. And then Becky tries out the 4 steps of assertiveness, and who knows, maybe it turns out better for her. So now we're talking not just that she gives up anger and rage, but now it's an exchange. Becky, if you stop doing anger and rage, try this now. Here's a new strategy for you. So it's almost like now an exchange. She's not just giving up. And I think that's what makes for effective progress in abuse recovery. So very much then, what we need to do to ourselves, our loved ones, and if you're a counselor, your clients, is we need to resource them. Now, I'm going to say, maybe with my example with Becky didn't know how to be assertive. So this was going to be a new strategy it was going to that she was going to tap into. That's great. No knocking new strategies in life. But let's now say that the resourcing for Becky doesn't come from new stuff in her life, but can also come from within herself. Strengths that she has carried with her for many years. Well, that's another place of resources, not just new stuff, but stuff within her. And this is what we're going to get at today. This is called internal strengths. And we all have internal strengths, even if at any one moment I say, or Becky says, or anyone says, I am so tapped out, I am so depleted, I have nothing left to give. Even those folks have internal strengths. So our job then is to help them find it, reconnect with that strength, pump it up, strengthen it, and then find out its relative meaning in that person's life. If we can do all those things, help them identify a pre-existing strength, pump it up, and then find meaning from that, then wow, now we've got a whole new tool bag of skills for recovery. And I'm going to say, but it's not a new tool bag. It's a pre-existing tool bag, but we're reacquainting that person, possibly you, to those resources. So that's a pretty long-winded warm-up to this topic, but let's get into it. And I trust it will make more sense as we go along. So I can just read the top part here. To constitute the wholeness of the individual, we need to consider the map of their identity. And again, this is not their name badge identity or the role they serve in a job or anything. This is stuff within themselves. So when we're talking about internal strengths, we're talking about three categories. The first category we'll be looking at is reflects more character. What makes you unique? What makes Becky unique? What makes me unique? We all have a unique, to ourselves set of characteristics that we can call character. Okay, that's one category that we need to look at. Here's the second category. We all have social connections. Why? Because we're wired for social connection. We're pack animals. Every person on this planet is a tribal person. We've spent 99% of our time as human beings coexisting with small groups of people, and we have evolved into a very sophisticated and complex way of interrelationships, interconnection with each other. And that has allowed us to physically survive, but that allows us to also be ourselves, be our best. We require people in our lives to be who we are. And if we think about what's the form of what do we do when we want to punish people the worst in society? Well, apart from killing them, what do? We imprison them, we put them in cages. And not only that, we put them in cages where they can't be in communication with anyone else. That notion of being in isolation, that notion of being in prison when you are segregated from all other prisoners. It's a huge cost to those prisoners' mental health, to such an extent that many experts consider that a form of torture. So we know that social connections are essential for us. We're wired for us. That makes us who we are. So we've got to look at that too. Okay, so we've got character, unique to ourselves. We have our social sense, our loved ones, friends, people in our lives. And then there's something else. Now, we need to now consider strengths beyond us as individuals and beyond our social connections. And we have to go further to understand what strength we can derive in this world. So now we're talking about a kind of a fuzzy layer, but we'll get more clear in a minute, a really unique layer of strength that goes beyond the human connection, beyond the human realm. So we've got three forms now: within, our connection and how we've internalized our connection with others, and then this last one, beyond the human realm. Now again, that sounds a bit unclear right now. Hang in there. We'll make this clear. And before we finish today, I'll be asking you to contemplate your own forms of these strengths. So again, there are three internal strengths. Let's get into them one by one. The first one, intrapersonal strength. So intra meaning within. These are those individual, unique qualities that we all have. we can see how they attach themselves to our outer roles, but they're really us, our stuff. They're me strengths. I mean, me strengths, Becky strengths, your strengths. And only we can decide what these strengths are for ourselves. So I can't say, nor should anyone tell you what your strengths or these identities, these parts of identity are for you. You're the one who gets to decide. So I'm going to start. I'll come to that kind of last bullet there. I want you to start thinking now about what you believe are your intrapersonal strengths. Now, maybe you're a good listener. Maybe you've got a heart of gold. Maybe you're passionate about things. Maybe you're courageous. So start thinking now of your interpersonal strengths, but I'm going to ask you now to tack a word onto it, tack a descriptor on each strength. So I said a good listener. Not just most people can listen, but how well do they listen? Most people show some degree of compassion, but do you hold deep compassion? Maybe you have an exquisite sense of humor. These descriptors are really important because they're telling you and the world why these characteristics are strengths for you. And let's just go back to that person who may be a survivor. They're going through a dark time and they say they have no strengths at all. They're so tapped out. There's nothing there. We can ask them, well, what strength would you like to develop? Okay. There might be a strength out there in this world that they can pick up and then take in. It doesn't have to be from their confidence that they have lived with this strength. We've all changed over time. We've all taken on new qualities. So this is also possible for you. So here's a question for everyone who's viewing. What are 3 intrapersonal strengths you identify with? I'm going to suggest jotting them down. You don't have to share them with anybody unless you want to. But then we're going to revisit them before we finish today. Okay? So 3 intrapersonal strengths. What are they? Give a descriptor for each one. Let's move on to the second category of internal strengths. Oh, look at this happy guy here. Given that it was this Father's Day, this picture is for all the fathers out there to take in, and yeah, that happy expression. Interpersonal strengths. So while there has been people in your life over the years, and there may well be people in your life currently, we're now going to consider how we internalize these people into our own set of strengths. So it's just not that, I don't know, my neighbor Joe here across the street is a good guy. The question would be, well, what traits of Joe do you consider good, and how do you embrace that within yourself? Okay, so it's this taking in of these other people in our life. Now, these interpersonal strengths, whoever they are, can be real. You know, that grandmother that had a special place in your heart because she always seemed like she understood you and was always there at your side. You know, that's what we want to be shooting at here. Now, truly, whether your grandmother is still alive or whether she has passed on, that's secondary. Because again, what we're looking at is the internalization of all that goodness that your grandmother shared with you. That's why she came to life. So alive or passed away, either can work. if you think, well, it's my dog. That is my interpersonal strength. My dog is just so loyal. No matter what mood I'm in, he's always happy to see me. He always cuddles up with me. He even knows when I'm not well, and I get strength from him. Well, put down your dog, but just not any dog. And use your dog's name certainly, but also what kind of dog? What are the strength of your dog that you so appreciate you can take on yourself, or you do take on yourself? It can also be someone you don't know. And doing this work over the years, I'm surprised how many people reference Oprah. Now, not that they've ever met Oprah, but they see her as a celebrity, as someone they really admire, and they can be quite descriptive of Oprah's many qualities. And again, if Oprah is important to you, well, what are the traits of Oprah that are important to you? And how can you, or how have you brought those into your own life? That's what we're shooting for. So now the question is for each one of you, what are 3 interpersonal strengths you identified with? No one can tell you what they are. You need to define that for yourself. As these names come to mind, write down the descriptor, core trait they have. And because they are so significant in your life, the notion here is that you've taken on that. And you just don't admire it from afar. This is also now part of you. Let's go to the third and last interpersonal strength, and that's transpersonal strength. Now, transpersonal strength is, again, beyond you and me, beyond the human realm. So here's a picture of what some West Coast indigenous folks would say is a spirit bear. Now, in a more of a scientific lens, we could say that's I'm going to say that could well be a black bear, and it has certain genetic conditions that its fur is not black but white. If you identify with the spiritual meaning of it being a spirit bear in your tradition, your customs, your belief system, then we're talking about then something beyond you and me. And we call this transpersonal strength. Trans in this way is defined as beyond the human realm. So again, the same kind of process we can consider here. Let's just take a step back and say, well, why are we talking about this spiritual stuff right now? Now, for all of those folks in the world, including myself, that were harmed as children, no one came to our rescue, and we were harmed. I mean, that's just reality. That maybe other people could not rescue us, or they did not rescue us. And so we were harmed. So we know then we've got to employ every resource we can to restore ourselves. And because that experience was so often isolating and that no other person came to you, we need to consider what is beyond then the interpersonal level as well. So what are they? Well, your transpersonal strength is going to be as unique as you are. And I can't define it for yourself, nor can anybody else. I can provide lots of examples, though. I mean, for example, if you believe in God or the Creator or any other deity of any other religious faith, well, that probably is a good example of your transpersonal strength. Any spiritual system of belief would fit in this category as well. The term higher power, if you're familiar at all with Alcoholics Anonymous or other 12-step programs, they define that as a particular belief that we could call transpersonal. But let's then just broaden this stuff out now. What about music? Yeah, for some people, music is such a key part of their life, whether they create music themselves, whether they just appreciate music. I think of, maybe more young people's age, will go out of their way to see a band play. If I remember the glory days of the Grateful Dead, people would follow the Grateful Dead from city to city to city because it was part of their transpersonal strengths. But maybe music doesn't speak to you, but art does. Many people get lost creating art. And in that sense of kind of being just zooming in on that being artful, they derive great strength from it. And there are also people who go from gallery to gallery to gallery, taking in the beauty and the meaning of artwork. A belief in humanity. You don't have to believe in a deity to have a sense of that, we're all in this together and that we all need to work on problems together. We all need to support each other in this world. And boy, doesn't this world need that? That could be a transpersonal strength. It might be being out in nature. By being in green space, that's where you feel resourced. If that's the case, then nature or the ocean or green stuff or however you want to call it might be a part of the planet that you're drawn to. The desert, the Grand Canyon, the Rockies, all are possibly for yourself transpersonal strengths. And that list could be infinite. It's up to you. So here's the question. What are your transpersonal strengths? Keep in mind, put the adjective along with the strength. So nature is useful, but now think, well, what's nature about for you? Is it the beauty of nature? Is it the synchronicity of the seasons? Is it the sense of the peace of nature? Is it the sense of the full range of energy contained in nature, from the power of a thunderstorm to the tranquility by sitting by a pond? Again, up to you to define, not up to me, not up to anybody. So now articulate to yourself 3 examples of transpersonal strengths you identified. All right. If you're following my instructions here, you should have maybe 9 examples in front of you. 3 intrapersonal, 3 interpersonal, and 3 transpersonal. It doesn't really matter though. Maybe you have more interpersonal strengths in other categories. This isn't a math test here, so don't feel like you have to follow through on anything that I say. It's just this deeper reflection about what gives you strength in life. Okay. Now we're going to take it just one step deeper, and then we'll be finishing off. On the concept of internal strengths. Now, take any of your 9 strengths that you've articulated with yourself. Our job now is to pump it up. We want to make it bigger, especially if you've been harmed when you're younger or you've suffered other losses. You may identify these strengths in the back of your mind, or you just, you think these strengths. We want now to make that bigger, more significant, not just being a thought, but a thought and something going on a heart level, and possibly even a strength you can feel in your body. So how do we do this? Well, we need to now know more about that strength. So I think I'm going to have to find an example of this, but let's say that let's go back to an intrapersonal strength. Let's talk about that exquisite sense of humor that you hold, that you contain. Okay, let's use that as an example. Well, the first question is, when did you learn to hold, to develop this exquisite sense of humor in your life? Was it from your first days on this planet? Do you remember when you were a toddler? Was this maybe you're just the happiest kid from the get-go? Or maybe it was in grade school and you hung out with your best buddy, and your best buddy was the joker of the class, and you saw how he made the day just a little bit better, and so you took on that quality from that experience hanging out with him. And it might be, well, maybe humor came to your life later. I think of one fellow I worked with years ago, and part of his, I'm going to say, I don't think he was terribly happy for much of his life because of his childhood abuse. But part of his work is that he got sober, and then he started playing around with stand-up comedy. And in town here, there was like a club or two where you could practice. It was like a class you could take for stand-up comedy, and he was extremely nervous doing this. He was not at all confident that he could make people laugh, but you know what? He actually went out and did that. He learned how to stand up in front of a group of people and make jokes, and he got a lot out of that. That experience opened up a chunk of his life that door was up until then quite closed. So it could happen anytime. When did that strength first come into your life? That grandmother, my guess is probably from when you were very little, but not necessarily. That's the first thing. What are the many ways it has given you strength? Well, that's going to also require a bit of a reflection and dialogue. What was it about that grandmother? How did she give you strength? When you say that she believed you, that she was always there by your side, how did she demonstrate that? Did she actually stand by your side? Was it her words? Was it her heartfelt emotions? Was it I don't know, the special hugs, or she made you special treats that were your favorite when you came to visit? These are ways that we need to explore further to find out how it gave you strength. Okay, so again, we're not just looking at your grandmother here, but that special grandmother, that warm, wonderful, supportive, unconditional grandmother, and how in many, many ways she offered you strength over the years. And of course, your grandmother may have passed on, but that doesn't stop the meaning or significance she has had in your life. So that's still part of you. It may seem dusty. Maybe you haven't thought of your grandmother for a long time. Now, let's reverse that. Let's now talk about your grandmother. Let's now hear all the many ways she was special to you and offered you strength. So now the third part, and this applies to any of these strengths, intra, inter, and transpersonal strengths. If that strength could talk, what would its core message to you be? Let's say that you draw significant resourcing of yourself by sitting by a pond. Maybe that pond is nearby your home. Maybe that pond is far away, but you get to it when you can. Maybe it's a pond that you had an experience of when you were a child, but still deeply hold them memory. So if the pond now could talk, okay, so we're stretching it a bit here, but if the pond could talk, what would its core message be for you, be to you? Maybe I'm stretching myself here, but maybe if that pond is a transpersonal strength of yours, the message might be the need and the beauty of accepting serenity in your life. The need of seeing interplay in all aspects of life. If we think particularly along the pond's edge, where you see there's a fancy word for this that I can't remember, but the interplay between land animals and water beings. And of course, all the green ecosystem surrounding. And maybe it's that exquisite interplay is what draws you as a strength. Maybe it's just seeing life form. Like everything around that pond means a vitality of life. And that vitality of life means much to you. Again, only you can answer these questions. I can't do it. But take all of those things that you can draw from that strength and then bring it down, summarize it now into a core message. I can say core message might be, oh, put it down in 10 words or less. And the reason why I'm suggesting shrinking all those messages that the pond offers to you to a core message is then you could write down this core message. The core message of your grandmother, the core message of your exquisite humor, the core message of the pond. Because now we can carry those core messages with us. And we could, even if we wanted to deepen this even further, have a dialogue with the pond, have a dialogue with your grandmother who's passed away, have a dialogue with your sense of humor. And as you would have this dialogue, you could learn even more about yourself and realize even more on how this keeps you going, keeps you strong in this world. So all of that is so essential. I'm going to say for people in general, but particularly so for those of us who've experienced abuse or trauma of some sort of another. Because you carry these strengths with you each day, even if you're not aware of it. And you need these strengths. It's not just the strengths from the outside world that we can bring into our lives, like learning assertiveness. That's good, not knocking that. But we also have this other toolbox that we've been carrying around with us for all our lives. And we need to honor both toolboxes to live the good life, to recover from our wounds, to experience healing. As you're well entitled to. Every abuse survivor is entitled to live the good life. Here's one way of adding to that goal. So Becky, I think I'm kind of done here. Yeah, I am done. I'm going to say maybe over to you and be curious if you've got any questions or ways of possibly noodling around with this idea and how to make this work in the lives of survivors.
Great. Thank you, Rick. First of all, I just want to say I love this presentation. It's just so often when we talk about trauma and abuse, we're talking about like the bad stuff that happens to us and the negative consequences from it in our lives. And rarely it seems like do we talk about these internal strengths and how they're beneficial to us throughout our lives, including when we've experienced trauma. So I just really appreciate kind of the tone and the hopefulness of this presentation. It's a I don't want to say departure. It's not that every presentation we have is, doom and gloom, but it's nice to kind of have a focus on strengths today. So I really appreciate that.
Becky, I should say that this conceptualization um, was developed by a trauma therapist, a psychologist by the name of Kate Hudgens. And Kate is still around. She runs a school of training called the Therapeutic Spiral, and this is one of her teachings. So thank you, Kate, for offering that to the world.
Absolutely. So are internal strengths the same as resilience, or are those different concepts?
I think they're closely related. I think we can become more resilient if we employ all the strengths that we have at our own disposal, our own capacity to tap into. So certainly one can't be resilient if they can't embrace their own internal strengths. But I'm sure you and I have met many people who, despite being wounded as children or other harms experienced, have great gifts that they've been offering the world. I think of particular heroes. I mean, we could say that, not that I know this angle of the life of Nelson Mandela, but we know he experienced great suffering in this world. 27 years, I believe, he was in jail. He did not leave being spent. He did not leave being bereft of strength. And that's not to say that he must have had his share and more of dark and desperate times. But somehow he was resourced. He was able to resource himself. I don't think he got much by being in his prison. But amazing resiliency. Now, I always think you've got to be a bit cautious to not talk about our common heroes and put them up on a pedestal, because I think my neighbor Joe could be equally a hero in his life, because he has embraced these strengths and shows resiliency and living his life too. So I think we can find heroes in everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I did have another question that came to mind, but then I lost it. As
So
so often happens, retaining thoughts across moments in time is not a strength of mine.
here's a piece I can add to the conversation. Certainly. Again, for those who may be watching this webinar and are in the helping business, and maybe they even help people work through abuse and trauma. You used the word earlier, Becky, which is so true, is that so often we focus on the negative, the pain, the suffering. And yet this notion of exchanging, moving from a problem orientation, say, characteristic, as we know, of many survivors might be a pattern of anxiety or depression. So, yeah, that would be a problem orientation. And yet the counselor can equally steer the conversation to balance out that orientation to a positive orientation. Hence, internal strengths, which is just an example of many positive, hopeful, strength building focuses in the counseling relationship. So, we can go one way, and that's going to be useful, but we need to go another way, and then we get balance. They're somewhat opposite. Strengths are different than weaknesses or problems, but we need to do both to hold things, right? Even though my hands are opposite to each other, I need both hands if I truly want to hold myself towards recovery. So just a gentle reminder for folks on either end of the helping relationship. to not lose sight of that notion of balance. And even though that they seem opposing, together, it's like a paradox. Together, we find the answer.
Yeah, a very important reminder. Thank you, Rick.
Mm.
Um, I thought of what I wanted to ask. So I think it's really helpful in this presentation that you talk about the different kinds of strengths, like intrapersonal, interpersonal, and then outside of self or other people. If there's a survivor who identifies very strongly with a particular strength, and the example that comes to mind to me is a survivor who um, identifies very strongly with their faith, and then they are abused within the context of that faith.
Mhm.
Can you talk a little bit about sort of navigating the challenge of maintaining that strength when it was perhaps manipulated by someone in the context of abuse?
Right, right. Yeah, that's a big one right there, eh? Um, well, let's back up a little bit. We know that for folks, often for folks who've been harmed within a religious or spiritual context, and you know, easy to have lots of examples come to mind on that one, they lose that strength because they no longer want to identify with that religion or that church or that religious institution, and they lose something out of their tool belt, and that's a shame. It's logical. You can't say, "Oh, you shouldn't do that," right? It's a consequence of the harm they experienced. It may be the harm they experienced directly from, say, a religious leader. It may be that they were harmed within that institution, and yet no one prevented it. No one stepped in. No one ensured their safety. So the harm that could be done to that individual could be overt, like they're abused by a religious person, or it could be more an absence, that the authority of the church or the institution abandoned them, and hence they were harmed there. Now, of course, that doesn't occur to all survivors. Some folk will still adhere to the strength, this transpersonal strength, and yet hold ambivalence or hold conflicting emotions about that. Now, that's a harder one to sift through. I think all trauma expressions can be sorted. Um, but I would first of all start to say that that is a much more complex undertaking than someone who says, well, I was harmed by that institution, therefore I no longer wish to identify with that institution or faith or practice or whatever the case is. I think we may need to consider the role of forgiveness for those folks who want to stay attached to that belief structure or that institution, that transpersonal strength. But again, you can't tell someone you got to forgive. That would not be right. Forgiveness in terms of trauma is a deeply personal experience. It's not something between people necessarily, or between themselves and the institution. At the end of the day, it's up to that survivor of whether they wish to engage in a process that we could call forgiveness. And that's also a pretty complex process. So I guess I don't have any easy answers for that individual or for this example, Becky, apart from that, to realizing the complexity and the difficulty of achieving that. But here's one piece I could add on top of that, if I may. Most counseling, as we normally define it, focuses on, well, they focus on ourselves and the characteristics of ourselves. We could even say it focuses on an intrapersonal level, or Another BuzzFeed language would be intrapsychically. Yeah, so we're talking about trauma. There's an intrapsychic harm on the individual. And of course, counseling focuses on the interpersonal realm. How that person is with others in their past, in their present, maybe even in their future. That's kind of it for much of the counseling biz. And I think I can say that because I've been working in it for a good long while. What Kate Hudgens' model here, though, allows us to realize is that healing or trauma recovery goes beyond that. And we can embrace aspects of the spiritual. We can embrace aspects of the religious. We can embrace this notion of transpersonal experience, which adds a richer additional realm of engaging with that person on the healing journey more than just all the stuff going on within them and how they hold their relationships with others. So we can then kind of, if this speaks to you, if this speaks to anyone, we can look at this particular approach at realizing that there is a very clear spiritual level of trauma recovery. And trauma recovery then as a concept would be, if we don't embrace this transpersonal level, it would be a more limited model of understanding what constitutes living a healthier and happier life. So that's what I really, that's an angle to this model that I really appreciate.
Yeah, thank you, Rick. I love that aspect of it as well. And something you said uh, sparked in me too, that something else I like about this is that um, there the strengths that we have, or the strengths that we have are all equally valid, even though they're different within ourselves, different between other people. They're all equally valued. There's not a particular strength that should be valued more than another or should be, celebrated. I think sometimes, especially in US culture, American culture, there are certain things that we identify with as being more of greater value than others. But what I like about this model is that it's kind of celebrating who each person is, that there's nothing inherently wrong with you, that the strengths that you possess are the strengths that you should possess because it's who you are. And
Exactly.
it's cultivating that. And that's something I really, really like about this model.
Well, let me give you an example, maybe as we're starting to wrap up here, of a young guy I worked with. He came to us for abuse recovery. He was sexually abused. I forget the specifics, but it doesn't really matter. He really wanted to get into groups, so he did a bit of individual work, and then he was lined up for our group therapy program. And that program goes on for, it's a long-term program, so you could, again, I can't recall how long he stayed in that program, but I would say probably about a year, which is on average how long people do engage with us for group work on issues of abuse. His transpersonal strength was Leonard Skinner. Now, if anyone on the webinar does not know who Leonard Skinner is, it's not a him. It's a rock band from I think most of their work came out of the 1970s. Okay, so this fellow, and I'm going back a few years, but I'm going to say this guy wasn't even born before Leonard Skinner did their piece of musical history, kind of Southern rock and roll kind of band. So I was really intrigued, like how would Leonard Skinner be a transpersonal strength for him? And yet he was so articulate. And he talked about how that music gives him a sense of power. He felt the rock and roll just resonated in his body. He felt like he could see the world clear by that music kind of echoing in his head. I mean, he went on to great lengths to talk about the merits of Leonard Skinner. Now, again, it wasn't my position to judge him on his musical taste, and he really wasn't talking about musical taste. He was talking about these deeper qualities that resonated in him, and almost on a physical level from the way he talked about it, by listening to this style of Southern rock and roll. So I think anything can be a strength for us in this world. And it's certainly not our job to judge those strengths. Our job is to explore, as counselors, our job is to explore what those strengths mean. And as that person talks about it, they get a greater sense of that within themselves, not out there like just the music, but what it creates in themselves that's empowering or uplifting or taps into all their good stuff, for lack of better words. So there we go, folks. Maybe Leonard Skinner is also on your list of internal strengths.
That's awesome, Rick. I love it. And you're right. It's not necessary for us to be able to explain or articulate why something is a strength for it to be a strength for us. Because some things are beyond explanation, honestly. I mean, some experiences that people have are difficult to describe, but it's, helpful to them nonetheless. I know, nature in particular is, being in nature is a strength for me. And I have read studies recently that talk about the behavior of trees, that they are actually more like people than we think they are, that they have a root system, a communication system, that they can talk to each other, they can send resources to trees that are struggling. I mean, there's different ways that we're sort of connected beyond traditional academic understanding. So not being able to explain or articulate a particular strength or why it's a strength is not required for this to be helpful. I think that's
You're
great.
absolutely true. And yet, Becky, if I may say so, how you describe, your appreciation of nature and particularly trees, maybe the strength you have is a sense of being in awe. And I don't know then if you need to even try to put more words to it. I think being in awe of things, that kind of, your jaw drops, you're just so gobsmacked is the British expression. You're just so blown away by the power and the complexity and the amazing sense of nature. It's a wonderful strength to hold.
Absolutely. Awe and wonder. Those are those
Yeah,
are great descriptors in and of themselves.
for
Well,
sure.
I know we're just about out of time, so I definitely want to, as always, give you a moment here to talk about the work that you do with online support groups.
Yeah, thank you. So if you are a male identified kind of person and you've experienced either childhood sexual abuse, or maybe as an adult, you've experienced a sexual assault, 1in6 Inc. And the web address is #1 in6.org. We offer 5 days a week online support groups where you can join us for an hour and a half each weekday and participate in an anonymous conversation. You don't have to give your name. Everyone operates as using a nickname, where you get to connect with other guys who are on the healing journey as well. And the group offers mutual support, and I facilitate some of the groups, and a colleague of mine facilitates the others. Sometimes we move into a bit of teaching on a piece of education that could be helpful to recovery, kind of like internal strengths. I think I've done this one before in the past. So it's a blend of peer support and education in a safe atmosphere. It's free of charge. You don't have to give your name. And I would say if that piques your curiosity, come on and check it out. So go to the website, There's a schedule of the sessions held each week, and the doors open 10 minutes before we start. So come on in. You can get to choose your own nickname, and join us for conversation.
Great. Thank you so much, Rick, for that and for your wonderful presentation today. I appreciate it. And thanks to folks who are watching, and we hope that you will join us again soon.